Picture this. You're Irish. Your family has been Irish for as long as anyone can remember. You grew up hearing the same stories, the same surnames, the same county pride. And then one day you see a random comment online that says, "A lot of Irish people have Viking blood." You laugh, and scroll. But here's the uncomfortable part, there's a very real chance that comment was talking about you. Because the Vikings didn't just show up, burn a monastery, and vanish into the fog like a movie scene. They stayed. They traded. They built towns. They married into local families. They became part of the population. And over time, the Norse story in Ireland didn't disappear. It blended in so well that most people don't even realize it's there. So today I'm going to walk you through 7 signs of Viking ancestry you can't ignore, even as an Irish person. And I need to be clear, none of these signs alone is a perfect proof. But when you start stacking them together, the picture can get very loud. By the end, you'll know exactly what to look for in your name, your hometown, your family stories, your DNA results, and even your old records. And if you're thinking, okay, but how would I even know? Don't worry. I'll show you. Let's start with the first sign, and it's one of the biggest clues hiding in plain sight. The first sign is your surname has Norse fingerprints. Now, most Irish people think surnames are either Gaelic, or Norman, or maybe Scottish, but the Viking layer is real, and it's been sitting under the surface for a long time. Here's how it happens. When Norse settlers arrived in Ireland, they didn't just remain a separate group forever. Over generations, names blended through marriage, language shifts, and local identity. Norse names got Gaelicized. Irish names got influenced by Norse words. And some names that people consider purely Irish can still carry echoes of that Norse-Gael era. One famous example people mention is the surname Doyle. Many history discussions link Doyle to the old idea of the dark foreigner, a phrase often connected to Norse settlers in Irish tradition. Now, I'm not saying that if your name is Doyle you're automatically a direct descendant of a longship captain. But it is the kind of surname that should make you curious. Other surnames that sometimes get brought up in Norse-connected discussions include names like Cotter, McAuliffe, McLaughlin, and variations of Harold or Harold. Some of these have complex histories and overlap with later Norman and Scandinavian influences too, so the key point isn't to treat it like a magic label. The key point is this: if your surname origin leads you toward Norse-Gael communities, coastal settlements, or old trading towns, that's a serious sign. And there's an easy way to test this without guessing. Look up the earliest recorded forms of your surname. Not the modern spelling. The oldest versions. Old spellings can show you whether a name came through Norse influence, Gaelic roots, or something else entirely. So here's a simple challenge: pause for a second and think of your surname. Has anyone ever told you where it really comes from? Not the family legend version. The oldest record version. Because that's where the truth hides. Now let's move to sign number 2, because this one surprises a lot of people. The second sign is your family is from a Viking town, even if you didn't know it. When most people hear Vikings in Ireland, they imagine raids on remote monasteries. But Ireland's Viking history is also a story of urban growth. Many places that became major Irish towns were deeply shaped by Norse settlement, trade networks, and long-term presence. Think of Dublin. Dublin is one of the most obvious examples because it grew into a powerful Norse-controlled hub at different points. That doesn't mean everyone from Dublin is guaranteed Viking descended, but it does mean Dublin sits right on top of a major Viking footprint. Then there's Waterford. Waterford is famously associated with Viking founding traditions and remains one of the places most often mentioned when talking about Norse influence. Wexford is another big one. Limerick has Norse associations too. Cork also experienced strong Norse influence, especially through trade and regional interaction. So here's the point. If your family roots trace back to these areas, especially if your people have been there for many generations, your odds of having Norse ancestry increase. Not because of a myth. Because of how population blending works. People intermarry. Communities mix. And over centuries, that genetic thread spreads. And it's not just cities. Coastal regions, river mouths, port towns, and trading points are key. Vikings were seafarers. They moved where ships moved. If your family comes from a place that was once a major route for ships, commerce, or coastal settlement, that's another strong clue. Now, sign number 3 builds on that, and it's one of the easiest clues to spot once you know what you're looking for. The third sign is the place names around you sound, not quite Gaelic. Place names are like fossils. Even when languages change, place names can survive for a very long time, sometimes centuries longer than the people remember. And in Ireland, there are place names that carry Norse influence, either directly or through later Irish spellings of Norse words. One clue is the presence of name elements that show coastal geography. For example, in different parts of the Viking world, you often see elements related to bays, harbors, inlets, and river mouths. Some words and endings can hint at Norse settlement, especially when you compare older spellings and local history. Here's what you do. Don't just look at modern maps. Look at older spellings. Old documents. Old town name versions. Sometimes the Norse layer becomes clearer when you go back to how the name was written centuries ago. And it doesn't even have to be your exact town. It could be the area around it. Nearby islands. Coastal features. Rivers. If the landscape and naming patterns align with Old Norse seafaring life, that's a meaningful sign. Now, sign number 4 might be the most relatable, because it's not on a map or in a book. It's in the stories families tell. The fourth sign is your family has a story about foreigners, seafarers, or a stranger ancestor. Every Irish family has stories. Some are funny. Some are tragic. Some are half true. Some are completely invented. But there's a pattern that shows up again and again in places with historic mixing. Families remember that somewhere back there, an outsider entered the line. Sometimes it's told as, "We had a foreigner in the family." Or, "Someone came from across the sea." Or, "He was a sailor." Or, "She married a man who wasn't from here." Other times the story is vaguer. "We're not entirely Irish," someone says, but nobody knows exactly what that means. Here's why these stories matter. Even when details change, they can preserve one core truth, that your line mixed with people outside the local population. And in coastal Ireland, outside could often mean Norse, or Norse-Gael communities, or later Scandinavian influence that arrived through trade and movement. But you can't take a family story as proof. You use it as a clue. A clue you can test. If your family story involves coastal life, ships, trading, or a person described as a foreigner who arrived by sea, file that away. Because when you combine it with surnames, towns, and DNA, it can become part of the puzzle. Now, that brings us to sign number 5, and this is where modern technology makes people both excited and confused. The fifth sign is your DNA results show Scandinavian signals, but you have to read them correctly. A lot of people take a DNA test and see a tiny percentage of Scandinavian and immediately shout, "I'm Viking." Slow down. DNA ethnicity estimates are not magical truth machines. They are estimates based on reference populations, and small percentages can be noise, or overlap, or simply the limits of how DNA companies label regions. But DNA can still help you, especially when you use it the right way. Instead of focusing only on the percentage, pay attention to your matches and clusters. Do you have many matches with Scandinavian connections? Do those matches connect back to the same Irish counties your family comes from? Do the shared matches point to certain coastal lines? Here's the best way to think of it. A small Scandinavian percentage by itself may not prove anything. But a Scandinavian signal combined with strong Irish coastal roots, Norse-linked place names, and historical records starts to look meaningful. Also, remember this. Scandinavian, in DNA testing doesn't always mean a direct Viking ancestor from the year 900. It can reflect older shared ancestry around the North Sea, and it can reflect later mixing. The Viking Age is one part of a bigger story. So if you've taken a DNA test, don't just glance at the chart. Dig into the match list. Look for patterns. That's where the real clues show up. Now, let's move to sign number 6, because this is the one that people who love genealogy get excited about. The sixth sign is you find a coastal ancestor pattern in old records. This one is powerful because it's not based on vibes. It's based on paper trails and patterns. If Vikings and Norse-Gaels were deeply connected to seafaring trade and settlement, then families with Norse threads often show certain repeating themes over generations. Look at occupations. Do you see repeated jobs like sailor, fisherman, merchant, shipbuilder, dock worker, or trader? Do you see your ancestors repeatedly living near ports, harbors, or river routes? Look at locations. Do your family records keep circling back to places that were historically tied to trade and coastal movement? Now, to be fair, coastal life doesn't automatically mean Viking ancestry. Plenty of Irish families lived by the sea with no direct Norse connection. But again, we're stacking signs. We're looking for multiple signals pointing the same direction. And if you want a practical way to check, here are 3 record types that can help. First, parish records. Baptisms, marriages, burials, these can show where families lived and how long they stayed in one area. Second, land and valuation records, which can show long-term settlement patterns and family clustering. Third, gravestones and local cemetery records. Sometimes you'll find old spellings, old family connections, and sometimes even clues about origin stories. When records show a long coastal lineage tied to old Viking-influenced towns, the odds of Norse ancestry climb. Now we're at sign number 7, and this one is tricky, because people either love it too much or reject it completely. The 7th sign is your features seem to match a North Sea mix, but you don't fall for myths. Let's get something straight. There is no single Viking look. The Vikings were not all blonde giants with perfect jawlines. The Viking world was diverse, and Norse populations mixed with Celtic, Slavic, and many other groups through trade, travel, and settlement. So if someone tells you, you have blue eyes, so you're a Viking, that's nonsense. But here's the more accurate version: the North Sea region formed a massive blending zone over centuries. Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, parts of England, Wales, Norway, Denmark, people moved across these waters constantly. Through the Viking Age and beyond, genetic traits spread around the sea like ripples. That means certain combinations of features can appear more often in regions shaped by that mixing. Light eyes, certain hair colors, certain facial structures, yes, these can show up. But they are not proof. They are not a certificate. Instead, think of features as the weakest sign on this list. Interesting, but not decisive. If you have other strong evidence. Surname clues, town roots, place names, DNA matches, and records, then features can feel like the cherry on top. But never use appearance alone. History is deeper than a mirror. Now, before we wrap up, let's do the most important part: how you actually know if this is real for you. Here's a simple way to stack the signs. If you only have one sign, like you're from a Viking-influenced city, that's interesting, but it's not enough to claim anything. If you have 2 signs, like your surname origin hints at Norse influence and your family is from a coastal trading town, that's worth investigating. If you have 3 or 4 signs, surname clues, coastal roots, old place names nearby, and family stories about seafarers, that's when it starts getting serious. And if you have 5 or more signs, especially including DNA patterns and record evidence, then yes, there is likely a Norse thread somewhere in your family story. So here's a practical checklist you can use starting today. First, research the earliest forms of your surname and where it first appears. Second, map your family's counties and towns and compare them to Old Norse settlement zones and coastal hubs. Third, look at local place names and old spellings in your region. Fourth, write down every family story about foreigners, sailors, outsiders, or someone from across the sea. Fifth, if you have DNA results, focus on match clusters and repeated patterns, not just tiny percentages. Sixth, dig into parish and land records to see how long your family stayed near ports, rivers, and historic trade points. And seventh, treat appearance as a curiosity, not evidence. Now let me leave you with something important. If you do discover Viking ancestry in your line, it doesn't make you less Irish. It makes your Irish story bigger. Because Ireland's history isn't a closed box. It's a crossroads. People came. People stayed. People blended. And the culture that came out of that mixing is one of the reasons Ireland's story is so powerful. So here's what I want you to do next. Comment your surname, your county, and whether your family has any story about sailors, foreigners, or an ancestor from the sea. And if you've taken a DNA test, tell me if you saw any Scandinavian signal, even a small one. And if you want a follow-up video, I can go deeper into the Irish surnames and counties most connected to Norse-Gael history, and how to verify it with real records. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next episode might reveal something about your family that you've never noticed in your entire life.